And I began to think, what if the church and the home combined their efforts and began to work off the same page for the sake of our children? And I think we understand that that is what's ultimately important, is that our children are actually more and more like Christ, more better citizens, not just to be happy. And I think as parents, we don't believe really that the goal is to make our kids happy, or do we? I mean, there are moments when I will buy something or do something or go somewhere just to make my kids happy. Even though most parents genuinely believe that their jobs aren't to make their children happy, I do think that we often get worn down and give in. And if you're a parent and you don't like it when your kids are in a bad mood, I mean, things are just easier when everyone is happy. You don't want them to be spoiled, you just want them to be in a good mood. And an entire marketing industry is built around the idea that parents want their kids to be happy. The advertisers know that we will sign them up for anything and everything that will make sure that they are socially adept, that they are experientially rich and academically well-rounded. And so we recruit coaches and tutors, instructors, mentors, all just to make sure that they can dance better or shoot the ball better or sing clearer or jump farther or hit harder or test higher than other kids. But at some point, we as parents can cross the line. And I know it's hard to tell when the line is because it's not always obvious in the moment. But I do know that I have crossed it before. In my pursuit of what I thought would make my kids happy, I threatened what would really make them come alive. And sometimes it's easier to take a look back and to see the mistakes in retrospect than it is to notice them in the real time. Thinking back and going through the mental photography in your head, you'll be able to perhaps pinpoint the moments where it happened. When things got out of control and competing values and good intentions somehow got crowded out by what was really important. And families run the risk of becoming relationally poor in the pursuit of becoming experientially rich. And in the desperate attempt to do what is best for their kids, parents trade what is essential. And too many times our parents wake up one day and realize that they have economized on the very relationships that they have vowed would always be a priority. Now, I've read hundreds of books, and I've had the privilege of attending lots of conferences, and I've had many conversations with parents. And yet I'm still amazed at how quickly I too can lose perspective. What I give to my children or what I do for my children is not as important as what I leave in them. And so when I began to think about this, I kind of came across about 4 different bottom line things that I thought were ultimately important. One of those is what is more important than anything else is that my kids have an authentic relationship with God. Another bottom line thing is both of my children need to know that I will never stop pursuing them or fighting for a relationship with them. The third thing is important is that my relationship with God and my relationship with my wife affects my children more than I realize. And lastly, just being together as a family can never substitute for really interacting together in a healthy way. And so when I thought about these 4 things, I noticed that they are connected by the value of relationships. These are all matters of the heart. And I want to look at a passage in Deuteronomy chapter 6. It's a familiar one when it comes to parents and children. It says here that Deuteronomy chapter 6 verses 4, "Hear, O Israel, Jehovah our God is one, Jehovah. And thou shalt love Jehovah thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy might. And these words which I commanded thee this day shall be upon thy heart, and thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thy house, and when thou walkest by the way, and when thou liest down, and when thou risest up." Amen. May the Lord have a blessing to the readers, hearers, and doers of His word. What Moses says here about the family seems so common sense that at first glance you may wonder why he even said it. But then you begin to realize, as I perhaps began to realize, that this is a remarkably futuristic statement. You would almost think that he had a divine revelation about what was coming. And actually, I think he did. His statements transcend every generation and taps into a future of families represented by a variety of cultures. In some way, what he said about the role of the family has more meaning to us today than it did to the Hebrew people back then. And I'm sure that some of the parents that were in that crowd thought, isn't this what we've always been doing? I mean, we've already been talking about this in the morning and through the day and at night. And it's not like they had much of a choice. I mean, there were a few powerful and tangible object lessons that God had already put in place to systematically remind them of himself. I mean, there was the manna that they depended on every day to eat, the cloud of smoke that hovered over them every day to lead the way, and the pillar of fire that was there every night to lead them and when they went to sleep. And they were a nomadic people, a traveling people with a God who was present in their everyday experience. There were no fast food restaurants or computers or cell phones or movie theaters or televisions or iTunes or iPods or iPads or iPhones or NBA playoffs or Starbucks. I mean, they really needed God, and he was obviously present. But Moses was aware that their current existence would not be their future reality. And so my translation of this passage, my Reverend Singley paraphrase, would be something like this. If you are going to impress these truths about God in the hearts of your children, you will have to be more deliberate about creating a rhythm within your home. In the future, there will be a myriad of things that will distract you, and it will be easy to drift away from the importance of having an everyday kind of faith. And I believe that Moses knew that in the Promised Land, families would have to be more conscious about creating a rhythm that transferred an everyday faith. They would have to be more deliberate about establishing visual reminders about God's power and his presence. And they would have to be more innovative about how and when they told God's story. What was instinctive for the family in the past had become, and is necessary to become more intentional for the family in its new reality. Most of our grandparents and great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents do not have it as well as we have it today. Perhaps their faith was much stronger due to the hardships they faced. And as they lived their lives and perhaps emerged from the southern states or from Mexico or from Puerto Rico or from China or other places, they dreamed for this promised land in which we now live. And Moses recognized the danger of this compartmentalized faith. And by the inspiration of God, he reminds us that over time, the daily relationship with God could be marginalized to a part of the day, then maybe a part of the week, and perhaps even a part of the month. He anticipated our tendency to segment God into an isolated category instead of viewing him as the integrating force that influences all of our life. He was concerned that society might one day view God as only a smaller part of culture and life. You know, it's characteristic of people to create an image of God that is so narrowly defined that it separates him completely from what's going on in life. Instead of seeing everything as somehow connected to God's story, we love to categorize and segment our faith. Moses makes a passionate plea here to impress upon the hearts of children core truths that relate to God's character. Now, some Bible translations use the phrase to teach diligently. Now, the Hebrew concept for teach means to cause to learn. In other words, it is different from the lecture or classroom-based education in which a teacher's responsibility ends once the material has been presented to the child and once the child has regurgitated that information on a test. In other words, God expects parents and leaders to refine and adapt their presentations until there is actual learning. There is a sobering revelation here about who is ultimately responsible for the stewardship of eternal truth. It's not Moses, the leaders, or the child, but the parents who are ultimately responsible for what should be learned. Now that shouldn't be surprising because family has always been an integral part of God's design. What Moses set in motion for the Hebrew people was very strategic. He tapped into the design of creation and leveraged it to nurture a lasting faith. It seems so obvious. This principle of rhythm is transferable to every culture throughout all time. Generally speaking, All people groups get up with the sun and they move around through the day and share a meal and they sleep through the night. It's just the natural flow of things. It's the transcendent pattern of life, this rhythm that establishes a consistent process to challenge the mind and to inspire the heart. These instructions here for daily life provide the structure that will enable your relationships to flourish. Now let's look closer at what he said here. We should talk about the things of God and the character of God as we sit at home, when we walk along the road, when we lie down, and when we get up. It is important for parents and church leaders to cooperate with the way that life naturally happens. Now, we all learn best through routine, and this is particularly true of our kids. When families create the right rhythm, it helps to accentuate learning and development. And although every family should look for the patterns that work best for them in light of their schedules, 4 specific times are listed in this passage that any family can leverage to build the faith of their children. Each time seems to suggest a different style or approach to learning, and each time also presents the chance for a parent to play a different role. Now let's consider what Moses is saying here. First, he talking about eating meals together. Now, eating meals together is an optimal time to have a focused discussion. It gives us as parents a specific time to assume the role of a facilitator or a teacher, to target a specific truth in an interactive and a relational context. Mealtime can be effective as an environment to systematically establish core principles, a time to have a formalized Bible study. He mentions walking or traveling together. And today, I guess the adaptation of this would be when we travel in our cars together. It's a unique opportunity as well. It's a convenient time to stimulate the kind of informal dialogue that allows kids to drive their own agendas. These time gives us as parents an opportunity to build a relationship through non-threatening experiences. At some level, we can function as a friend or a companion and help interpret life together with our children. Things that we pass by, accidents, nature, the weather, all these things that we can look and observe. We can look to how to integrate and to build into our children a worldview of Christ. Now, enemies to this are video games, and the music can be a distraction, and videos and all those kinds of things. But also, if used correctly, they can also be tools to help teach our kids about God and His character. Bedtime can also be a meaningful time for families. Now, too often we can miss out on this time because we can have a habit of sending our kids to bed rather than going with them. This private time gives us a chance to have an intimate conversation, and as a role, we can be more like a counselor who listens to the heart of our child. A time to extend forgiveness to our children or to receive forgiveness from them, and also to pray about their day tomorrow and to kind of reconcile their hearts back to God before going to bed. Now, getting up in the morning provides a blank page for the family to start fresh. Just a few encouraging words can make a big difference in our child's day. You know, carefully spoken or a few written words can give our kids a sense of value and instill purpose. Imagine this time as you being a coach and you're about to send your children off into an important game. We should ask ourselves the question, what is it that I can say or do to give them fuel for dealing with whatever they have to face today? I think if we as our families can take advantage of the times that are already built into our routine, as God inspired Moses to write, that the effort required to initiate interaction during some of these times would be minimal, but the return can be enormous. Now, the next slide that I'm about to show you is one that just kind of talks about all these 4 times of the day, as well as the role that parents can play and ways that we can encourage and facilitate discussion for our kids. As I said before, this is part 1 of a 2-part message, and I want you to stay tuned to the second part that should follow in about 2 weeks. Again, this part will be talking a little bit more about the church and how we can better integrate with families and work together for the cause of Christ. Thank you, and God bless you. Any questions, please don't hesitate to write back a comment here on Facebook. Go to the discussion section and you can put your comments or questions there. God bless you. I look forward to talking to you soon.